Freedom may not exist only in those dramatic moments when people gather in a public square, wave flags, and raise their voices. Perhaps freedom reveals itself most clearly after almost everything has been taken away. When your possessions are gone, your name has been replaced by a number, and all that seems to remain is a weakened body and the sound of your own breathing. At the bottom of that absolute loneliness, one question may still remain: how will I meet this situation? In the quiet instant when a person chooses an attitude, a final form of inner freedom can still breathe. It does not guarantee survival. Nothing could guarantee survival in the camps, but it can preserve something human even at the edge of death. Hello, this is Reboot Life Now. There are nights like that. It is 2 in the morning. The world feels completely still, but sleep has disappeared. You climb out of bed, walk into the kitchen, and pour yourself a glass of cold water. The refrigerator hums as if it, too, is struggling to keep going. On the table are this month's credit card statement and a pile of problems that have not been solved. A thin draft slips through the window and brushes cold air around your ankles. On nights like these, life can feel dry. You feel like a cactus standing alone in the middle of a desert. No one is bringing water, but somehow you are still expected to remain upright. Words like success, financial freedom, and self-realization can sound like dead language in a cold kitchen. You work hard, yet the situation barely moves. Your bank balance keeps sinking as though it has nothing to do with your effort. Have you ever felt as if you were trapped inside an invisible prison, repeating labor with no end in sight? If you and I were sitting across from each other now, I probably would not give you a long speech. I would simply place a warm cup of tea in front of you. We would watch the steam rise and perhaps nod once, as if to say, yes, life can be painfully hard. That might be enough. But at this moment, I do not have a warm cup of tea in my hands. I have only these imperfect words, and I must use them to knock on the door of your heart. So today, I want to bring out a record that reaches deeper than the warmth of tea. It is not merely a story from Auschwitz in 1944, nor is it a conventional clinical report. It is the testimony and psychological reflection of a psychiatrist who was imprisoned between 1942 and 1945 in 4 Nazi camps, including Auschwitz. It is not the soft reassurance of, stay hopeful, everything will be fine. It enters like the freezing air that rushes into a room when a window is opened before dawn, sharp enough to wake the senses. The book is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Today, I am not simply going to retell a concentration camp survival story. I want to ask a question that still presses on us in 2026. In a society weighed down by helplessness, emptiness, and pain that seems to offer no answer, what can help a human being stand up again? Before the war, Viktor Frankl was already a neurologist and psychiatrist in Vienna. He had developed the foundations of logotherapy, a form of psychotherapy centered on the human search for meaning, and he led the neurological department of the Rothschild Hospital, which served Vienna's Jewish community. He became a professor at the University of Vienna only after the war. Then the Nazi regime stripped away almost everything: professional standing, property, freedom, and most of the people he loved. In the camps, he was reduced to prisoner number 119104. A worn pair of glasses, a starving body, and a number seemed to be all that remained. Human dignity was treated as if it were worth less than the mud on the camp floor. A prisoner could wake to find that the person beside him had died during the night. A ladle of thin soup might be the day's entire reserve of energy. A human name disappeared, and a number took its place. The camp system was designed to reduce people from persons into objects, units of labor that could be used up and discarded. Yet Frankl observed that inner life did not disappear in exactly the same way for everyone. He later described a camp doctor's observation that deaths rose sharply between Christmas 1944 and New Year's 1945. The doctor believed that many prisoners had privately expected to be home by Christmas. When the date passed and liberation did not come, disappointment weakened them. At the very moment disease, hunger, and exhaustion were already attacking their bodies. This does not prove that optimists died first, and it should never be turned into a universal law of survival. People died in the camps because they were starved, beaten, diseased, worked to exhaustion, and murdered. Frankl's point was narrower. When hope is tied to a deadline we cannot control, the collapse of that expectation can become psychologically devastating. A similar lesson appears in the story of Admiral James Stockdale, the American naval officer who spent more than 7 years as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam and was tortured repeatedly. Years later, writer Jim Collins asked him which prisoners had struggled most to survive psychologically. Stockdale answered that it was the optimists, the men who kept insisting they would be released by Christmas, then by Easter, then by Thanksgiving, only to watch each deadline pass. Stockdale's lesson was not to abandon hope. It was to refuse the confusion between faith in the final outcome and fantasy about the immediate timetable. This became known in management literature as the Stockdale paradox. Never lose faith that you can ultimately prevail, while at the same time confronting the most brutal facts of your current reality. Our lives are not prisoner of war camps, and ordinary disappointment should not be equated with those experiences. But the psychological distinction still matters. Someday everything will work out is not a plan. Next year I will finally become successful is not a structure. When unsupported expectations collapse, they can pull us deeper into despair. Real hope does not deny the ground beneath our feet. It plants both feet on reality, even when that reality is severe, and still looks for the next responsible action. Before we continue, please remember rebootlifenow.com. Reboot Life Now is a place for people who want to change their lives by writing down their problems, identifying the one thing that matters most, and beginning again through small action. You can find more stories in the 12-week Life Change program at rebootlifenow.com. Now let us return to man's search for meaning. Another story, often used to illustrate realistic hope, is that of the British explorer Ernest Shackleton. In 1915, his ship Endurance became trapped and was eventually crushed by the Antarctic ice. The men faced extreme cold, dwindling food, isolation, and no clear path to rescue. There were 28 members of the Endurance Party, including Shackleton, 27 men under his command. Shackleton did not keep morale alive by promising that rescue would arrive on a convenient date. He organized routines, assigned concrete work, guarded against idleness and despair, and kept attention on what could be done that day. After roughly 634 days, from the expedition's departure from South Georgia to the rescue of the final group, every member of the Endurance Party survived. Their survival depended on many things: leadership, skill, cooperation, endurance, and extraordinary good fortune. But it was sustained by disciplined action in the present, not by a fantasy that tomorrow would automatically save them. So who endured psychologically in Frankl's account? Not people who denied the horror. The prisoners he remembered as retaining an inner life were often those who faced reality without allowing reality to define the whole of who they were. Somewhere inside, they protected a small sanctuary that the camp could attack but could not fully own. Frankl wrote that almost everything could be taken from a person except one final freedom: the freedom to take a position toward the circumstances one faces. This was not absolute control. A prisoner could not choose whether he would be beaten, starved, transferred, or killed. Frankl was speaking about a final moral possibility. The possibility, however fragile, of choosing how to answer what could not be changed. A sentence, often attributed to Frankl, says that there is a space between stimulus and response. Researchers at the Viktor Frankl Institute have explained that this is not a verified quotation from his writings. Still, it is a useful modern summary of part of his thought. Between what happens and what we do next, there may sometimes be a narrow interval. In that interval, we may be able to choose a breath instead of an explosion, a question instead of an accusation, or one responsible action instead of surrender. A modern example of someone defending his inner identity under confinement is Rubin "Hurricane" Carter, the American middleweight boxer. Carter and John Ardis were convicted of a triple murder in New Jersey, and Carter received multiple life sentences. He maintained his innocence throughout his imprisonment. Carter later said that he refused prison stripes, prison food, and prison work because he would not behave as though he accepted the identity of a guilty man. His defiance led to long periods of isolation. By his own later account, nearly 10 years in solitary confinement. Not merely 90 days. He read, studied, wrote, and worked on his case. In 1974, he published his autobiography, The 16th Round. After 19 years in prison, a federal judge overturned Carter's convictions in 1985, finding that the prosecution had been fundamentally unfair. The state later declined to try him again. It is more accurate to say that his convictions were overturned and the charges were eventually dismissed than to say that a jury formally acquitted him. His body had been confined, but he fought against allowing the prison to dictate the meaning of his identity. Frankl practiced a similar form of inner resistance. During freezing marches and forced labor, he sometimes imagined himself standing in a warm lecture hall in the future, speaking to students about the psychology of the concentration camp. This was not a denial that the camp was real. It was an attempt to see the present suffering from a future vantage point, to prevent the immediate horror from swallowing the whole horizon of his life. Frankl often returned to a sentence from Nietzsche. He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. The words are Nietzsche's, not Frankl's. But they fit the center of Frankl's argument. The why does not have to be a grand mission to save humanity. It may be intensely personal. A person you love, unfinished work, a responsibility that still calls your name, or a promise that only you can keep. Around the same period, another Jewish writer struggled to protect an inner freedom. Etty Hillesum, a young Dutch woman, whose diaries and letters were written between 1941 and 1943. She worked for a time at the Westerbork transit camp and was later deported to Auschwitz, where she died in 1943. Hillesum's writing does not ignore terror, yet, again and again, she refuses to let hatred become the ruler of her inner world. She notices the sky, small pieces of beauty, prayer, and the moral danger of becoming inwardly shaped by the cruelty surrounding her. The exact sentence, often circulated online about the sky inside me, should not be treated as a verified quotation without checking the addition. But the larger theme is faithful to her diaries. Even under persecution, she tried to preserve her ability to love life without denying the evil being done. She did not survive Auschwitz. Her death must never be transformed into a comforting lesson that meaning guarantees rescue. What her writing leaves us is something different. Evidence that dignity and moral attention can appear even where survival is taken away. Another person who transformed suffering into creative work was the Mexican painter Frida Kahlo. At 18, she was catastrophically injured when a bus collided with a streetcar. Her spine, collarbone, ribs, pelvis, leg, and foot were badly damaged. She eventually walked again, but pain and medical treatment followed her for the rest of her life, including numerous operations and long periods confined to bed or to a body cast. While recovering, Kahlo began painting more seriously. A mirror was placed above her bed, and she repeatedly turned toward the subject she could not escape: her own face, body, identity, and pain. Her turbulent relationship with Diego Rivera added emotional wounds to the physical ones. Her art was not simply an attempt to forget pain. It forced pain into a form that could be seen. Kahlo once rejected the idea that she painted dreams. She said she painted her own reality. On her canvases, the damaged body did not disappear. It became testimony. This is the difficult point. Suffering is not automatically meaningful. Pain is pain. Injustice is injustice. We should not romanticize it, seek it, or tell someone that their suffering is secretly good. Frankl's argument is more careful. When suffering cannot be removed, a person may still be able to choose a stance toward it, connect it to responsibility, or turn part of it into service, creation, courage, or love. Meaning does not make the wound unreal. It changes what the wound is allowed to become. Frankl himself was sustained partly by unfinished work. Before deportation, he had completed a manuscript that would later become The Doctor and the Soul. The manuscript was confiscated and lost at Auschwitz. In the camps, he reconstructed key ideas on scraps of paper when he could. After liberation, he rewrote that book from memory. Man's Search for Meaning was a different work. Frankl dictated its original German version in 9 days in 1946 after the war. So it is inaccurate to say that he wrote Man's Search for Meaning itself on scraps inside the camp. What he carried through the camps was the responsibility to preserve and rebuild work that had not yet been completed. Now let us return to your kitchen at 2 a.m, to the low hum of the refrigerator and that cold, silent room. We throw questions into the darkness. Why has my life become so tangled? Why am I not succeeding like that person? When will I finally stop worrying about money? We stand before life like children demanding that it hand over success, happiness, love, and certainty. Frankl reverses the direction of the question. The central question is not only, what do I expect from life? It is also, what is life asking of me in this particular moment? Life does not ask in abstract language. It asks through the situation in front of us. You have lost your job. How will you respond? You have been betrayed. What will you do next? Your health has changed. Your bank account is nearly empty. Someone you trusted has left. What answer will your actions give? This is a Copernican shift. Just as the old picture of the universe changed when Earth was no longer placed at the center, our inner position changes when we stop treating life only as something that must satisfy our demands. We become not merely victims of a question, but people capable of giving an answer. That answer is not a slogan. It is expressed in responsibility, action, and attitude. How can a change in meaning alter the experience of suffering? Frankl illustrates this with a well-known case from his medical practice. An older doctor came to him with severe depression after the death of his wife 2 years earlier. He loved her deeply and could not imagine a meaningful life without her. Frankl did not offer a slogan such as, "Be strong," or "Time heals everything." Instead, he asked what would have happened if the order had been reversed, if the doctor had died first and his wife had been left behind. The man answered that it would have been terrible for her and that she would have suffered deeply. Frankl then helped him see his grief from another angle. By surviving his wife, the doctor had spared her the suffering of surviving him. His pain had not vanished, and nothing could make the loss pleasant. But the pain could now be understood as the cost of protecting the person he loved from bearing that same burden. The man's sadness did not become happiness. The loss did not become fair. But the suffering was no longer completely without meaning. It had become connected to love and sacrifice. This is one of the capacities that makes human life distinct. We can ask what a painful experience calls us to become. Yet, we should be cautious. We cannot know that every tragedy was meant to happen, and we should never impose a meaning on another person's suffering. Meaning is not an explanation forced from outside. It is a response that a person may discover and choose from within. Frankl also wrote about a different form of suffering, the emptiness that appears when urgent activity stops. He called one version of it the Sunday neurosis. During the work week, a person remains busy. Then Sunday arrives, the schedule opens, and an uncomfortable emptiness rises to the surface. The problem is no longer immediate physical pain. It is the absence of an answer to the question, what am I living for? People may try to fill this existential vacuum with pleasure, status, power, work, shopping, or money. None of those things is automatically wrong, but when they are used to silence the question of meaning, they can resemble drinking seawater. The more we drink, the more intense the thirst becomes. How, then, can a person answer life when the body itself becomes a prison? Consider Jean-Dominique Bauby, the editor-in-chief of French Elle. In 1995, at the age of 43, he suffered a massive brainstem stroke. After a coma, he awoke with locked-in syndrome. His mind remained alert, but almost his entire body was paralyzed. He retained voluntary control of his left eyelid. A speech therapist used a frequency-ordered alphabet. She recited letters, and Bauby blinked when she reached the one he wanted. Letter by letter, word by word, over roughly 2 months, he dictated a memoir, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. The book's central image is powerful. His body felt like a heavy diving bell, sealed and sinking. Yet memory and imagination could still move like a butterfly. He remembered food, beaches, faces, conversations, and the lives of his children. The metaphor does not pretend that paralysis was freedom. It shows that even when movement was almost entirely gone, consciousness still created a form of movement. Bauby did not answer his condition with easy positivity. His memoir contains anger, grief, humor, sensual memory, impatience, and love. He answered through creation. The walls of the hospital did not disappear, but language passed through them. There is a quiet dignity in continuing to do the small thing that is still possible. When the world feels as though it is falling apart, you iron a shirt, you mend a torn sock, you answer one message honestly, you walk for 10 minutes, you organize one page, you keep one promise. Not because these actions are grand, and not because they magically solve everything, but because they are the answer available today. We should never say that ordinary stress, poverty, professional failure, or loneliness is equivalent to a Nazi concentration camp. The Holocaust was a historical system of persecution, forced labor, starvation, and mass murder. The comparison has limits, and respect requires us to name those limits. But Frankl's question can still enter our lives without erasing that difference. We may be constrained by money, illness, trauma, family responsibility, social judgment, or circumstances we did not choose. We may not control the walls around us. We may not be able to remove them today. Yet in some moments, a small part of the answer remains ours. The next breath, the next honest sentence, the request for help, the boundary we set, the work we continue, or the person we refuse to stop loving. Tonight, before you go to sleep, look into the mirror. Look at the exhausted person whose shoulders have fallen. Do not offer that person an empty promise that everything will definitely turn out well. Say something more honest. I am still here. I cannot control every condition around me, but I can decide what my next response will be. Rain may fall, wind may come. Inner freedom does not mean pretending we are dry while standing in a storm. It means trying to protect one small place inside, where the storm does not make every decision for us. After liberation, Frankl did not reduce the meaning of his suffering to a single word. Love was one of the forces that sustained him. So were unfinished work, responsibility, memory, and the possibility of serving others through what he had learned. His message was not that suffering is good. It was that even when suffering cannot be undone, human beings may still search for a responsible answer. Perhaps the pain you are living through today will one day help you understand yourself more clearly or become a light for someone walking through a similar darkness. We cannot promise that, but we can refuse to let pain have the final word before our lives are finished. So live through this day. Search for meaning. Answer the question that is in front of you, and protect the freedom that still remains. This has been Reboot Life Now. If today's story spoke to you, visit rebootlifenow.com for more stories and for the 12-week Life Change program. You can also share your own story there. I will see you at rebootlifenow.com.